committed to minimising the financial burden on ratepayers and has continued to focus on cost recovery in setting its fees and charges for the year. We understand the cost of living pressures facing members of our community, and we've aimed to keep our revenue needs to a minimum. However, balancing the aspirations of the community captured in the shared vision of the Scenic Rim Community Plan, which is still in place for the 2011 to 26 version, which was renewed a few years ago, and considering that against the pressures of maintaining public assets and protecting our future financial sustainability as a council are all key factors in determining our budget settings. The draft 23-24 budget is aligned with the draft operational plan, which is underpinned by the corporate plan, Scenic Rim 26, and the broader Scenic Rim Community Plan 2011 to 2026. During consultation in developing our community plan, one of the key priorities identified by residents was the efficient and equitable delivery of affordable services that provide best value for money. That guiding principle has underpinned the development of this budget. As well as tonight's session, we will of course be holding similar events in the same time slot on Wednesday the 26th of April at the Centre in Bay Desert and Thursday the 27th of April at Tamboree Mountain State School. You can of course also continue to contribute to the community consultation through the Let's Talk Scenic Rim online platform, which will be accepting feedback on this project until Wednesday 3rd of May. Once all the feedback has been considered, the final 2023-2024 annual budget will be prepared and then tabled for adoption at a special meeting of Council scheduled for Wednesday 14th of June. Council values all feedback and is committed to continuing to work with the community to deliver a sustainable future for our region. I again thank you for your time in attending tonight's session and for your constructive feedback that will help us to achieve our shared goal of shaping a successful future for our spectacular Scenic Rim. Now I shall hand over and firstly introduce, for those who haven't previously met, CEO David Keenan, and that's probably the end of me. I'll then take a seat and listen along for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be very quick because there are staff here that can put forward a presentation. There are some parameters that need to be thought of about where we're up to at the moment. This budget's moving along, the draft budget is moving along quickly. We're in fact in front of the work that's been done by the LGAQ, Local Government Association of Queensland, in relation to the Council Cost Index, which is currently being prepared at this point in time. That Council Cost Index will give us a percentage that they believe is applicable across the different areas in local government. It is a challenging time in local government. There are constraints put on some of our delivery mechanisms. There are issues with supplies and where we're finding materials from at this point in time. And we're also entering a point in time where it's a bit of a hiatus that's sitting there in relation to where federal and government funding is. We're almost out of those cycles at this point in time. So the Palaszczuk government goes obviously to election in October next year, so a lot of that funding has wound down. The Albanese government has not yet worked out its funding streams, especially in relation to local government. So those challenges are all in front of us. What I'd be really happy to receive is as many submissions as possible on the budget. Talking about innovative ways of how we can deal with our reliance on ratepayers and try and reduce that heavy reliance, which is about 70-30% going through. So all of those things would be really helpful for us to shape the budget and to make sure that in June we've got a budget that's been through a thorough consultation process. With that in mind, I'm going to ask Oliver Pring, the General Manager of Sustainability, to come forward and do a short presentation.
Okay, short. My I did prepare some notes, but yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for coming, even though it's a small number. Any number is really good, and feedback will certainly be welcomed. And following on from the Mayor's welcome and the CEO's welcome, also I'd like to acknowledge the fellow GMs, Caroline McMahon and Deborah Howe, and together with Chris Gray, we're going to provide you some all things finance, budget and asset management in a very limited time frame. I will make reference to the budget document that's available on the Let's Talk Cynic Rim. It's also online, and there's a couple of copies out the back. Those that require a copy, just let us know and we can certainly provide that. I'm not going to go through it in full, certainly just going to flick through and highlight some of the key elements that are worthy. We're really dedicating these community sessions to the participants for you to be able to ask and provide feedback to us so that it helps the councils make an informed decision around this budget process. Without that feedback, I guess it's this is a new step that this council is undertaking, and we're certainly looking to get all types of feedback in regards to budget and general aspects of council. So, the annual budget. I mean, council sets the annual budget annually because it's responsible for providing a wide range of services, facilities and assets to the Scenic Rim community. These services and facilities include, but not limited to, the roads, bridges, waste management, parks, recreation, libraries, community centres and disaster management. Additionally, the budget also provides an opportunity for council to communicate its priorities and plans to the community. And part of that communication is the purpose of today, to seek the feedback and input from residents and stakeholders to ensure or to help and ensure that the council's spending aligns with what the needs and expectations of the community that we serve. Now, the budget process today, whilst it's 23-24, it just doesn't look at it in the macro and look at it into 1 year. We are required to do it over normally a 10-year, which is called long-term financial forecast. So we'll take all those calculations and like many things with COVID and everything, even looking beyond 6 months was challenging. So in order to form a long-term financial view aspects of councils, there's a lot of metrics we've got to take into account, and not all those are right, but that then allows us the annual opportunity to review that on an annual basis to make sure that where we've deviated from the track to get back on track, to make sure that we're doing all we can to maintain the financial sustainability, along with informing the elected members of decisions, because they're not only making decisions for this term, but also beyond and the future generations of council. So it's really important in the mail, and you probably realise that they've gone up exponentially. I mean, that's, in some aspects, that's a positive sign for the region, that is an interest. Now, I just want to sort of demystify in 5 seconds or less the common misconception that because your valuations have gone up 40, 50%, that your rates will go up 40, 50%. That's certainly not the case. Obviously, if I look at it in simple terms, when council develops its budget, if it costs us $1 million a year to deliver all our services, maintain our assets, and we have land valuations of $1 million, then what we call the rate in the dollar is $1. Now, if the valuations went up to $2 million, and not taking into account inflation or anything else, and to deliver the same level of service and everything else was still $1 million, then the rate in the dollar would halve. So council adjusts the rate in the dollar. The misconception around that your rates are going to go up 90%, which is some valuations that we've seen increase in the Scenic Rim, is totally not correct. Council has a budget, council has obligations to maintain its assets, to provide the services, and the general rates is just one component of the way we fund it. We will go out actively as well to try and seek external funding, but we're in a position where we're reliant on ratepayers to fund the operations of council. There's no one else that's going to fund the way council operates, so we're really reliant on the ratepayers. Otherwise, there'll be some issues around providing these service. I think some stats from the recent valuations is probably just interesting to point out. We've seen that the 18,493 properties within the Scenic Rim, we've seen the valuations increase from 6.48 billion to 8.33 billion, or around 28% in total. So there's going to be some rates modelling that's going to be undertaken to make sure that, as fair and equitable, the residents contribute towards the maintaining of their service. And I guess as part of the other aspects I've just quickly gone through some aspects. it's a complex document. I'm certainly open to, in the space of tonight, field more queries should there be in the gallery today. But the only other aspects I really wanted to touch on was around the level of scrutiny or regulations that council has to abide by. And these really, the main two parties are out there at the moment are the Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government, and along with the Queensland Treasury Corporation. They keep a close eye on council to make sure that budgets, what we're looking at tonight, and also actual performance, which are then reported in annual reports, are prudent and the right decisions are made by council to ensure that our financial obligations are catered for. We've seen in recent times where some councils nearby have faced dire financial pressures and have resulted in intervention or tough measures decisions being made where the levels of service had to be cut. Otherwise, those councils only know that the only people that can pay for those services are the residents. So the residents had to make a choice of hefty rates increases in order to maintain those services. And lastly, the department provides a series of tools and metrics that we're assessed and guided by. So when we set a budget, we can't set a budget that, what we call deficit. We have to try and set a budget that's certainly balanced. And this, at this point in time, and this is not the final set, it's obviously based on final feedback and further workshops with the elected members and officers, is determining that right mix. At the moment, from a position in time, to maintain the same level of service, taking into account increases in electricity, they've gone up 30%, insurance, fuel, materials and service and everything else, to provide that level of service, there's a figure there that's around 7.9% that's sort of indicated to balance council's books. Now, the dot points have been highlighted there as if you go a percent lower or a percent higher. Ideally, the green that's pointed there, 8.9, that allows us to have a little bit of a slim margin. At the moment, the 7.9 is basically what's called a balanced budget. There is no profit. It's basically, I think, at the end of the day, based on the statement of financial position, comprehensive income, it results in about $33,000 operating surplus, which is neither here nor there in a $110 million budget. So it's effectively a balanced budget. And what I was alluding to before was the department, they're making sure that councils make the right decisions in maintaining the assets. We don't want the assets to be neglected or not being looked after because they can become risk matters. The department and QTC set about and make sure that we abide and we set about the financial, as a going concern of council, they review our budgets and they review our end of year performance to make sure that there's external analysis of it to make sure that we are reporting and that we are looking after, as the custodians of the assets, the benefit and the interests of the community. That's all I had to say today. I kept it really short. However, we certainly try and maximise the time for any questions and any feedback. I'll now hand over to Chris to talk about assets and particular projects.
Thanks, Oliver, and good evening, everyone. Before I actually present a little bit of detail on capital, I do want to highlight certainly something that Oliver did raise when he was talking, and that was that our asset base current book value is approximately $1.1 billion. Now, that's to replace those assets we have. Now, with recent cost increases and impacts, that certainly may be undervaluing the replacement value at this time. We also, to manage those assets, we actually have plans called asset management plans, and we have 4 of those, and they cover off on the majority of the assets that we have. They provide high-level direction regarding investment and investment need for each of the asset classes that we maintain. I will say that probably one of the biggest challenges we have faced and are continuing to face, let alone the cost impacts, is the ongoing disaster recovery funding program. We're currently looking at an estimated final value of around estimated value now at $50 million of work that's required to bring our assets back to pre-disaster standard. More than likely will be in excess of $60 million when we're finished. Before I move on, I must acknowledge the Queensland and Australian governments in their funding of the majority of these works, with the Queensland government applying 25% and the Australian government 75%. Within the draft budget, we actually do recognise that there are some opportunities within that recovery program to actually undertake or include better outcomes when we're there maintaining those or rebuilding those assets. So we normally have $500,000 approximately set aside for minor works within our asset area. This year, we've allocated $2 million to that particular task. That will certainly afford us to potentially leverage better outcomes and build them back better. Probably an example of this closer to home is Tevyetville Road. I know we've copped a reasonable amount of flack about the time it's taken to actually go to rebuild that piece of infrastructure, but the reality of it is that we've been able to actually leverage some additional funds from through the reconstruction program to build back better in this particular case. Also, I'd like to highlight our reseal program. It's slightly less than what we normally invest per year, this year being $3.6 million, of which about 35% of that will be spent in the western part of the region. Also, a detail within the capital budget is continued work on Moffat and Wee Street Kalbar to rectify what has been a long-term drainage issue in that particular area. Also worth noting that over the last few years, council officers and certainly have been engaging with councillors around a community facilities review. This review is envisaged to provide an informed decision-making process for council when it comes to the investment in our community facilities as we move forward. There is quite a backlog identified within what we have within our community facilities. Mentioning that, some of the highlights of what are yet to be constructed this year and into next year is a dog park for Bicentennial Park in Boonah. I know a small expense, but something that I think would be welcome put to the community. Also, last year, this current financial year, there was an allocation for sports field lighting within the current budget. It was always hoped that we could leverage additional funds to actually get a better or a much improved outcome with that funding. We're currently awaiting a decision on some applications we put forward. This would enable appropriate lighting of the Coronation Park here in Boonah. I must also mention vibrant active towns and villages. I'm actually going to step back and talk about the operational budget. We have actually got in the current draft budget a slight increase in the operational budget within the vibrant active towns and villages part of the budget. This is to take into account that the long-term goal of council back in the I'll say 2015 or prior to that, the council started on the vision of improving the look and feel of our towns and villages. Work has been undertaken in Boonah, in areas around Tamborine Mountain, as well as progressing in Bow Desert. It's this next financial year we're looking at further developing master plans for a number of our towns, which includes Kalbar as well. Not forgetting, I've talked a lot about our existing infrastructure. There's also a need for us to review our local government infrastructure plan, or known as an LGIP, and with that is to help drive the economy. And I must mention that we are certainly, I'm certainly aware as an officer of council, the need to look at certainly helping the development of more further industrial land, which will result in more jobs for the region. Well, that's pretty much me. I'm sure there'll be questions in more detail, so I thought I'll hand back now to Oliver.
Thanks, Chris. Now's the opportunity for any questions, but before we do that, I'll just point out to the team at the back, the community engagement team. We've got Natika and Jenna. On your desk today, you'll have 2 feedback forms. One's with a QR code for those that are technologically minded. You can scan that QR code and that'll take you to an online feedback form. Otherwise, we've also got the manual form where you can write a pen, but preferable would be the QR code, so that's automatically registered into the Let's Talk Scenic Rim. Jen and Natika will be at the back. Those that aren't familiar with the Let's Talk Scenic Rim platform, we've got a couple of other campaigns out there as well that are out there as part of community engagement. So I guess the party now is over to the residents. We do have some roving mics out to allow the queries to be captured.
I'm just asking about the environment. I mean, our biggest asset, probably our most valuable asset, is our environment, and perhaps some opportunities that could be made in collaborating with groups within the community. I know that. So I'm speaking on behalf of Boonah and District Landcare, and there are lots of things that, ourselves as the Fassifern Field Naturalists, Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland, who all would welcome partnerships with the Scenic Rim Regional Council to be able to build capacity or add capacity to what council is already doing in those spaces. And I think that that's probably, just from experience, a resource that that council could make better use of. There are also organisations in our community like Boonah Organisation for a Sustainable Shire who would love to be working with council on some of the waste management strategies, things like helping with tip shops and reducing the amount of waste that goes into landfill. We're aware of some really innovative technologies around composting organic waste and, huge machines that can turn organic waste into compost and stock feed in 24 hours. So those sorts of things, I think, would be useful partnerships and would add to council's ability to be able to provide services.
Yeah, I think certainly that's certainly good feedback, and I think there's some queries there to be answered. And I think whilst we won't go in depth with them tonight, we will acknowledge some of those, and we will acknowledge the rest of them, and also give us some opportunity to put some other queries out there.
Thank you, Oliver. If you don't mind me, with regard to your comment around waste and the value in retrieval of the waste stream that we currently have, as of today, council has issued an expression of interest developed in a way that not only industry but community groups and others can put a submission in. It doesn't need to be detailed. It just needs to pretty much put your hand up and say, look, I'm here. These are the things we're thinking about. These are the things we may be able to help you with or we're interested in. If you need any, it's available on our website, and certainly if you've got any further questions, we've got the right officers that would be able to provide support to that.
Thank you. Can I add one other thing? So just speaking in terms of facilities, and I know that council has an ongoing commitment to evaluating and what's the word I'm after? Doing an inventory of the land that they own. Boonah and District Landcare is a very active group, and we've been looking for council land, which we now do have, over at the Fassifern
by officers, and unfortunately taken process. So, look, aware of the situation, and certainly happy to talk further in more detail.
Please, I'll make a time with you.
No, thanks, Rose. And I think we've got the, a lot of those, your initial queries, we've got Deborah and the team, she's taken those notes on board. But I just wanted to point out, like, part of the budget document shows Council's commitment to spectacular scenery and healthy environment, which is about the biodiversity management, biodiversity and climate change and animal management. So there's a commitment there in the current budget, for forecast budget for 23-24 of around 3.24 million, but over the 10 years, there's 38 is sort of forecasted to be spent in that area just to maintain those things. But
Well, and there, we work really closely with that department, and there's even more that could be done that would add value to that part of the budget. Especially when it comes to, we can access grants that council can't always access. We just need council's support sometimes to do that. And that happening in a fairly timely way is sometimes what we need.
Okay. I'm actually here on behalf of the active community. Oh, okay. Righto. I'm here on behalf of the Active Community Transport Group in Boonah and the FASAFERN. What I'm wanting to know is what provision is there for any transport within our region. I understand Mount Tambourine has got some transport, on-demand type of transport. We've got nothing here, and we've got an ageing population who don't all drive, and they've got no way of getting to other transport connections like trains and so on. So is there anything in the budget in that regard?
Not in our budget at this point in time. We certainly advocate towards other levels of government to actually provide that service. Look, from a personal point of view, I have an aged auntie who lives in town here, and she's been able to engage with Blue Care and other services that can provide a linkage for her. But I know that opportunity is not always available for everyone. So certainly something that council is advocating towards, and certainly something that council is quite keen to continue to advocate for.
Well, I realise it is a state government, like TransLink. We've had TransLink out here talking about what they can do and so forth and so on. They've had a trial in Logan district with this on demand, and they've said, when they've got their results, they'll be able to come back to us, but we've never heard anything back. So there must be some way that we can get some connection going.
Look, I will just add a comment. I don't sort of get into the debate, but there's a few observations. The lack of public transport generally in our region is something that I'm getting very flat-forward battling with TMR and other levels of government.
Me too.
And certainly we've had some active conversation in the discussion for this next South East Queensland Regional Plan. Having growth without public transport is creating significant disadvantage and social impact for us as a region. And that's something we are calling out very strongly. It is well known from the research, and it's well acknowledged by the departments. The challenge we have at the moment is getting a move to action. We have not relented on pushing forward for trying to find solutions. I'll go to a cheeky observation, just to give a moment of humour for you. I'm a fan of the possibility, and simply because I look at the way the economic modelling of the state happens, I don't see how we reach the threshold. We keep fighting for it, and we'll keep fighting for some trials. But the drone technology that I've witnessed that has the potential to give small scale, lower cost accessibility, so you don't have to try and get even 16 people together to make it justifiable. 4 people making a viable 13-minute trip from somewhere here in Boonah to connect to a train at Springfield, or to a 20-minute trip to be at the hospital landing port in Brisbane, is the sort of thing we're having as an aspiration. Now, that's 10 years away, we still got to fix today. We share your frustration. And I'm not sure, I know there's been a lot of work done on Tamborine Mountain through, is it Rotary of recent time? Up there for this trying to get an active solution, I think it is. Yeah,
It was Rotary.
yeah. And they're struggling a little bit, I think, is to get through. That's the short answer. So we're all leaning into this, and we haven't relented.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, is it worth noting that Council is meeting with Mr Scales?
Oh, yeah, well, look, we have a whole range of ongoing conversations. We have a range of conversations through regional planning, which has Department of State Development, Transport and Main Roads, Health and a range of other in there to make sure we're talking about all of the issues to accommodate growth in community. The one of those that generates the most heat and lack of solutions is transport. Not surprisingly, because everybody wants it. We do have we have regular conversations with Transport and Main Roads particularly about the existing network and trying to make sure it's maintained as efficiently as possible. But we do have an upcoming meeting with the Director General for Transport and Main Roads in May to discuss those future issues about, my language, about giving reasonable and fair, equitable access for our region with what all of our cousins in South East Queensland enjoy.
Can I add an idea that has been floating around in my head for a while, because, you know, the last thing that we want to do when technology is moving so fast is invest in a lot of infrastructure that will be redundant in 10 years' time. But I cannot understand why in communities like ours, why there can't be some state government subsidy for people who are not able to drive themselves to get subsidised Uber transport. That would then provide employment for people with cars who, you know, for example, might be retired but want to do a little bit of part-time work, and would fill the need for that transport for people from, especially, you know, transport from A to B or wherever they need to go, but provide employment as well to people as much as they...
New drone technology is coming about, but that's, you know, wherever.
2030.
Well, that's if everything goes right, you know. We've got to get the air a whole bunch, and being an aerial pilot myself, I know that there's a lot of problems that come up when you start to operate in the third dimension. However, one of the interesting things that's coming up out of this discussion is the universal cry of lack of manpower, lack of personnel. I don't know what the modern terminology is, but anyway, we're having trouble getting workers into businesses to get jobs done. We're having trouble getting the materials to do those jobs. But it seems to me we've got a demographic that nobody's even looking at. And I can say this with certain authority because I sold my mainstream business 15 years ago and became a community worker. We've been working for the community in all sorts of capacities for 15 years. I personally drive trucks, I drive tractors, I drive mowers, I shovel gravel. I'm lucky, I guess, in a certain extent that I'm fairly fit for my age, but that's not by accident. And I think for a community organisation, a community service organisation such as the council, which after all, even though it's corporatised, that's what it is, it's a service business. I think if you begin to access that manpower that's sitting out there wanting something to do, you know, they're 65 years of age, they're 50 years of age, they're whatever, and I think there's a whole lot of expertise out there in every community, and if we asked them to come step forward, they would, I'm sure. I personally work longer hours now than I ever did when I was in business. And I enjoy the mental challenges it brings. I enjoy keeping reasonably fit. I can't get my weight off. I don't know how to do that, but anyway. In the great scheme of things, maybe your demographic or your organisation needs to look at other ways to attract people in your organisation to work. Yes, the young people need to work, but you also have stuff to do and it's not getting done. And when that stuff is being done, it's not being done quickly enough. And I am very proud of the fact that I've done a lot of major works working for people like John Holland and so forth. My jobs came in on time and on budget every time because I wouldn't have it any other way. Anyway, for what it's worth, just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. And look, in amongst there's a whole range of issues there. We probably won't take on some of the whole of societal, but the notion of how can the community help itself, I think, is a key principle that's heard there, and how do you engage that capacity in community? We're probably not here to debate some of it, but obviously any of these ideas as you work through, a bit like you've discovered in the past, because remember we've had those conversations here and thought we were heading down a path and then got our legs cut from underneath us pretty quick. And it's not for want of trying. I reflect. One of the examples on volunteerism that I haven't had a chance to share with the councillors, but one of the challenges that Los Angeles is facing heading up to their next Olympics is having volunteers, because their labour laws have changed in LA. So you can't have volunteers, you have to have paid workers. And that changes the whole affordability of having 2 million volunteers servicing right across the network. Totally changes their model. And it also changes the spirit of volunteerism, which is they're finding a whole different focus. The people that are now looking to start registering them don't have the same ethic coming to it. So you get into those twists. We better not start solving those problems tonight.
Certainly, and also with the CEO and Caroline with General Manager People and Strategy, there's certainly a body of work being undertaken with staff surveys, attention and retraction, that word, of staff. Yeah, we are realising, with our monthly reportings around capital works, that the labour shortages and everything else, but certainly there's no to try and tap onto that market.
So just picking up firstly on Teviotville Road, which is a fairly contentious one over here. So you've got betterment funding?
Yes, we have. And so we put in the application as part of the process. We have to wait until we get approval of that application before then we can apply for betterment. So we have got a level of betterment for that. Unfortunately, the betterment way we're going to deliver meant we couldn't start the restoration works until that was approved. Which, right. So they'll believe there's a press release of probably even sitting in my in tray for me to approve to go out about that. So and there are other roads in similar circumstance to that where we've got an approval, but we're looking at an approved outcome in their delivery.
Right, so just to help me understand this, is that all that rehabilitation, restoration funding from the two floods, yes. Does that sit under your operating budget, under your road maintenance? It's already in our budget because it's actually something that we've already allocated for. So as the approvals come through, they then sit as we update our budget as a quarterly. So it doesn't sit in this budget because it's actually an external funding source to do with an event that occurred prior to now. Right. So your draft budget doesn't take any of your carry forwards into account? No. Okay. So, going back to my list, aqua fitness pool, just going on things of interest over this side. Aqua fitness pool, 70,000. What's that for?
I believe it's to do with the chlorinator, an upgrade of that element and a couple other elements that given its constant use and the level of, look, I'm not a pool expert, but it's
fine.
certainly to do with maintaining its operations.
697,000 for a strategic property purchase. Is that PCYC?
No, I'm not sure.
It's
Strategic
a fairly
Mandela.
definitive amount, so I figure it's something.
We don't have any identified funding sitting within this budget to build the PCYC. Our partnership with the group that is looking to establish that is to find appropriate land, and we're currently in that process with them now. It's their intention then to seek grants to then build that facility in conjunction with PCYC Queensland. We have no, so there's no property purchase associated with the PCYC. So that's it. Yeah.
So what is 697,000 for property purchase?
Which page are you actually referring to? I might have to get back to you on that one, actually. Yeah.
Sure.
It's probably worth commenting, when you're doing a property purchase, you're not going to name what you're trying to buy before you've done the deal, otherwise the price immediately goes up. So there are some things that, for commercial respect for the prudence of expenditure, we won't name what the purchase is for yet, because otherwise we expose ourselves to someone inflating the price. That's happened to us in the past, where someone made a comment that probably shouldn't have been made, that pushed the cost of a project up and meant we couldn't go ahead with it for a period of time until the market stabilised again.
There is an issue with regard to how we address the runoff at the depot. So it's around an operational matter that we need to tidy up. So, we're certainly in the process of addressing some long-standing issues with some of our operations. And one of these is really around managing that, where we clean our plant and how that water is managed.
Okay. Footpaths and drainage works, your 10-year plan master plan to increase and to replace that, we're still on around the 500,000 for footpaths, 570, and 500,000 of that is going to Gallery Walk, and I see that the linkage between the council subdivision on Bruckner Road and the Boonah Rathdowney Road, that's been pushed back 2 years to allow for the Gallery Walk. Because that one's been on there for a while, hasn't it? The Milford Road one.
Yes, and if you were to compare, and I don't want to go in a huge amount of detail here, but if you were to compare 2 years ago's 10-year program, which we provided with the dot against the years, with cost impacts and other aspects, we've had to pretty much, what was appearing on our 10-year program of 2 years ago is sort of certainly stretched us out, that some of even the projects that appeared on 8 and 9 are now in 10 and 11 and 12 on the program as a result. So we're having to, because we try and match our 10-year capital investment with our long-term financial forecast, that's where we're sitting at the moment. But the reality of it is, when we do a further iteration of our asset management plans, we'll probably find that the level of investment in our assets needs to be increased, which then puts more pressure on the rating dollar. So while we're still in that flux of understanding the cost pressures that we're at now, we're not going to basically readjust what's on there, other than to match what's in our long-term financial forecast.
So, sorry, Chris, I'm not trying to be obtuse. So how did Gallery Walk get in there ahead of Milford Road, which has been on there for a while? And
Oh, look, we go through a review process on an annual basis, so we have a 10...
priority?
I think it's a 37 or 38 year a forward plan of works for footpaths at our current funding rate.
Right.
We also need to acknowledge and manage the existing footpaths that are coming towards end of life or need intervention of some description. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago a 50-50 split between over the 10-year of new and upgrade of existing.
Yeah.
At this point in time, it's slightly higher on the new. So the reality of it is, as new information comes to hand, or there's an additional impact that we may not have taken into account prior, may change the order in which a footpath project actually occurs in the program.
Okay, thank you. The rubbish traps of High Street.
Yeah, there's probably a longer story than for tonight with that, but we're still in the process of working towards that.
Can we get that story later?
Yes, there is still probably later, being in 2 to 3 months. It will be probably a better time to be able to fully, but it's still planned. There is a location picked, but there's still a bit of negotiation with that occurring.
Thank you. But as a pig and calf sale yard, the 100,000, what is planned there? Are we going back to what it was originally to do with that site?
Officers are still putting a report together with options.
Right.
I'm not in a position to make comment on exactly what will occur there, but certainly that is a work in progress.
Okay. Borrowings, 3.98 million. Roads, bridges?
There's no borrowings intended for this budget.
Right. Okay. I obviously can't read the budget properly.
No, yeah, it's one of the first budgets that we haven't anticipated any borrowings this year.
Okay.
But generally, borrowings, the last borrowings we had were for this financial year, and they were for the land purchase.
Right.
And then last year also we had the refinancing of some loans.
Yes.
At the historical low rates, but for the first time at this point in time, unless there's identified works that needs to be done, that need to be funded, and obviously we only take out borrowings for strategic capital projects and not for operating. So at this stage, there's no borrowings.
I've got 2 questions left, I promise.
Mm-hmm. No. We've got plenty of time, we've still got now. So.
Hinchcliffe and Kangoon
sorry.
Bridge. Hinchcliffe and Kangoon Bridges. So I know that you handed the grant back because it turned out to be a much more expensive job. But the 5 million and 2 million from memory that you've set aside for that, does that include the grant that you're anticipating? So you're not really going to have to find 5.9 million.
So it does actually include an anticipated grant. Those projects are there subject to us achieving funding through the new round. Part of the reason why we handed the grant back was it was capped at $2 million, or 50% of the overall, 50% of the cost of the building of the structure, capped at $2 million. The current round, or the new round, is capped at $5 million contribution from the federal government, with a 80% funding rate from the Australian government towards it. So the reality of it is, was trying to leverage as much as we can funding from external parties to actually fund those 2 structures.
Right. And so the $1 million+ that was originally raised as council's contribution for those bridges, what happens to that?
It's currently sitting there on the proviso that we actually, if we were successful to get the funding this year, that we'd actually be able to start the works or program through the tender process to actually start delivering, which is the most appropriate time to deliver a bridge is, well, in theory, our dry time of the year. So the reality of it is we're hopeful to get a response prior to the end of the financial year so we can actually start. So the work...
So it's carry forward, essentially?
Otherwise it will be a carry forward for that particular purpose.
Okay. Last question.
Sorry, Wendy, I will address where you picked up that. So I'm assuming you picked up that 3.96?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the repayment of existing borrowings for this year.
Okay.
For 23-24, that's at 3.976. To find out where the borrowings are, on the statement of cash flows, you'll see proceeds from borrowing. So this doesn't work properly, the thing, but you'll see that 5.075, which is in the first column. That's the current financial year where we borrowed 5.075. But for next year, for 23-24, there's no borrowings for those next 3 years.
Brilliant.
And I believe in our long-term financial, the only borrowings that we have in place are for new cells at Bromelton transfer station, things like that.
Okay, and promise, last one. Page 16 and 17, those two ratios. 16 and 17, your net financial liabilities ratio and the leverage ratio. So they're both going down over the next 10 years. But what does that mean for ratepayers? Does that mean, which I mean rates, what does that...
I mean, obviously, these metrics, and we'll take it as QTCs being our financer. So they'll assess these in our capabilities to repay loans and repay our borrowings through them, because they won't put council in dire stress or situations if you're not, and lend you more money if you're not able to pay it. So generally the impact for the ratepayers, as I said, if it's cost $1 million to operate council, that includes existing payout of loans, you're not seeing any impact to yourself directly from this. So it's more the council's capability to pay for loans, and if we do have any plans to borrow loans in the future, what's our capacity to be able to repay? They're going down, which is good. That's a good sign, because we're not, obviously, if they're going up, it's our capacity is going up to the hilt in terms of our operating revenue to service our existing borrowings.
So your capacity is also reliant on rates to a 50% degree. So if you're going to really push those loans down or those ratios down, what does it mean for the increase in rates?
Again, we've factored into the council's budgets annual, so that what I showed you there, the statement of financial position, or what's called the balance sheet. So we've got on our books, we've got $39 million in non-current liability, which means their loans that aren't payable within the 12 months. So what's payable within the 12 months is your current liabilities. So up there, that's 3.976. So we've got to pay that within the next 12 months.
Yes.
But we've also got $39 million that's beyond the 12 months. So that, when it comes to the payment of that, that's contained within our materials and services. So that's all contained with that $98 million operating cost to service those loans. So again, when it comes to trying to balance and calculate the general rates, they're all taken into account. And it doesn't mean, one of the advantages councils took in that prudent decision to refinance some of those loans. Some of those loans were at 7-8%, and we were able to take advantage of historically low interest rates and lock those in. Now, Queensland Treasury Corporation is not like your normal commercial banker. We're not borrowing at 11, 12, 13%. Council, is able to borrow at convenient, QTC broker that through their bond market and are able to attract funding for council to build with capital projects. So it doesn't necessarily impact. What we're seeing is what impacts council, the ratepayers per se, is that those other external factors. If we were in the vacuum and we knew what all our expenses were, they didn't increase, then $1 million every year will set. So the only fluctuation would be that the valuations in property would have to adjust the rate in the dollar to get the same amount of revenue.
Yeah.
So generally, in all sense, the impact on the borrowings, I mean, obviously, if we do have to borrow more money, then there will be additional costs. But at this current time, what those indicators say or provide for is council's capability to be able to borrow more money now and into the future.
Thank you.
Which we still have capacity to. We've just recently had our rating from Queensland Treasury. We've got a sound rating with a developing outlook, and that paves us well that we're able to meet our current and long-term financial obligations as they currently stand. So.
Thanks, Oliver. One of the things that I'm perturbed about is the statement that we won't have any loans past the end of this financial year. No,
No, we're not going to borrow any loans this year.
Okay.
We still
so
have.
you've still got loans that you've got to pay off.
That's correct. We've still got on our statement of financial position, which is the old balance sheet.
Okay.
So you'll see we've got $39 million of non-current loans, and that amount, as you go out between the next 10, 20 years, will slowly go down.
Okay.
You'll see there, it's for 23, 24, it's around 39 million.
Okay.
Goes down to 36 the following year, and then 34 and such, until such time we may, I think in about 3 or 4 years' time, I think we're borrowing a couple of $1 million to fund a new cell at Bromelton for the landfill. And obviously the waste business as a business itself will pay that as well. So,
what's the other than rates and charges? What's the other income stream, major income stream for this council?
Good question, Sherry, thank you. We've got the perfect graph to show what that is, and I think as I touched on before, I think council's in one of those unique positions where, if I like to put it, we're master of our destiny. We're able to fund 70% of our revenue based on general rates and utility charges. There are a number of councils out there where that's the opposite side. They rely on 70% through external funding through other levels of government. So, and in their ratings within the Queensland Treasury and the Queensland Audit Office, they're generally in those weak positions. So the services that we provide, and obviously as long as they're the service that the community wants, we have an ability to fund those services and those assets. The other aspects, we do get a level of what they call financial assistance grants, or we commonly known as FAGs. So that's our component of the tax, the GST, that gets handed down from the Australian government. It's interesting to note, for every $1 of tax that gets paid in Australia, I think 87 cents goes to the federal government, 20-something cents goes to the state government, and we're left with 3 cents. However, we've got a lot of assets to maintain, and in the past, where we've had the heydays of getting good levels of funding from the other governments, other levels of governments, we're seeing now what they call the cost shift. So where local governments are environmental stuff, in the past it used to be roads, rates and rubbish. We're seeing a lot more services being pushed onto local governments to try and fund and provide those services. Public transport, that's not the...
Sure, thank you. One of the things that I see as a trend over my lifetime is that we have a call on the public purse called rates, which is a direct local government call, but we're also looking to get grants from other levels of government. The source of the funding for those grants is still us. And I am continually perturbed at the level of exposure we have to these sorts of services, bearing in mind that the efficiencies aren't going up, the efficiencies are going down. And I think that's part of the thing that we've got to address. We've got to get more efficiencies rather than less.
And that's certainly a good point. And a lot of our avenues are looking at efficient ways. Chris and the team are looking at different ways roads built, but we're faced with regulations. One of the things that we see now that the public generally doesn't see is traffic management. The public generally see it used to be one flashing car when the side of the street used to get mowed. Now you see 3 vehicles.
Oliver, traffic management is a crock. I see on Tambourine Mountain one morning at 8:08, I was going to work, there were 22 men on site, 11 of them traffic management, another 5 sitting in the bucket of a machine looking at their phones, another 5 leaning on the bonnet of a Land Cruiser doing nothing, and we wonder why our works cost so much. You know, this is part of the problem. Now, I'm not stating names. I know most of the guys, but this is a general problem in society.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they were employees from another local government authority in our area. I'm joking, Stu. Okay. Mr. Mayor, I might ask you to simply come up and do a bit of summation and thank people for their feedback. Thank you, Oliver, and thank you, Chris.
And I agree, this diagram here really epitomises the challenge, and we're a well-placed council. But what we don't have is some of the councils that have private entities and a whole heap of paid services and parking systems that they gain revenue from, etc., etc. We don't have those because that's not the way we've been shaped as a region. Now, whether we get to the point of those, we keep exploring the opportunities to gather revenue from other sources that aren't directly from our ratepayers, because, hey, I'm a taxpayer too. So we're all paying the contribution for these things. The challenge is that there's not enough money washing around, no matter which level you are in the economy, to deliver what we want as Australia versus what we can afford. The federal government's dealing with that problem, state government's dealing with that problem. But thank you for those inputs. I think it's really insightful to see the opportunities and the interest for those things that we can collaborate more on and give more information about, like the expression of interest process, which is open right now, which is a great opportunity, and to connect those points of light. Perhaps one of those things I observe out of tonight, there's a lot more information that we have published in this last budget around some of these things, and a lot of information we publish on a regular basis that somehow we're not getting the connection to. So that's a conversation. We'll keep putting the challenge out. I do urge people to look at not just the council website, but Let's Talk Scenic Rim is a really powerful tool that once you're connected in, you'll get push, I think it's called push notices, positive notices when there's something there for you to check out, which helps get that connection. You know, we are a small part in a very big cog. Right at the moment and for the next 2 years, the REPA funding, the Restoration of Essential Public Assets funding, the QRA administered, we're like over 100 other councils in Australia who are all hammering on the same door at the same time, putting in applications and trying to get betterment as well as approvals. And they don't have the resources to process them any faster. So there's the notion that it's just as simple as we can find more people isn't always practical, and there's more to it, and that's a great example we found with QRA and with the National Emergency Management and all of that funding. But I have to say, my observations from talking to other councils, we're way better placed in our relationship, maybe because we've had too many experiences and we become too good at putting in our applications. We do get preferential treatment. We get well treated because we don't have a lot of rework. We're really good at putting in our applications, unfortunately. So, look, thank you for that. I think there's a lot of inputs there. There's opportunities for us to think about within what's in our control. There's certainly things there that we'll be leveraging into conversations with others and looking at how we put a public conversation around some of those potentially as pieces of work to build into the next year. But there's a few opportunities I've written down there tonight to share a bit more information on a few things. And thank you again. Use the submission form and use the online submission form to those who are on the live stream. We are trying hard to listen to those things, try to put them into a context, find a way to make sense and find options. We're always looking for bright ideas that we can make fit through the challenges. But thank you very much. Thank you to the team for putting that together tonight. And we bid you good evening. Travel safe. Thank you. I acknowledge Councillor McInnes, thank you for making the journey to get here with us. We had to acknowledge your apologies and I want to acknowledge that you made that effort as well. So, look, thank you, everybody. Please keep safe travelling, and I bid you good evening.